I would say happy National Signing Day, everyone, but I don't know if it's necessarily just in technicality at this point and not necessarily in functionality or in spirit, but it is National Signing Day, the first day of February 2023. Welcome into the Voice of College Football, Boomer Sooner. And of course, we got Jason Ray on the line for a 100th edition, Jason. So it falls right on National Signing Day, our 100th show. So we have been chugging along here for practically 2 years here at the Voice of College Football, Oklahoma. We come your way each and every Wednesday. That is our target each and every week. Please join us every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. How about yourself?
I am doing just fine. And it appears as though we've got everything but National Signing Day and recruiting to talk about, but that's okay. If anything breaks in the next hour, we will be here or throughout the day in regards to I will be tracking commitments and signings throughout the day. So whatever the teams apply, I will be posting videos. So be looking out for those across our team channels. And of course, you know the deal. Please leave your comments and questions there in the live chat and we will get to them. Jason, I had stated a number of times in the last several weeks as various conference schedules were being released that this Big 12 schedule intrigued me more so than any other schedule by far for obvious reasons. You've got Oklahoma and Texas still in the fold. You have 4 new teams joining the conference. And just to see how the approach would be, because we would have to say that the Big 12 schedule in the past, over the past 10 years since Texas A&M and Missouri left, was the most anticlimactic schedule release, just looking for where would the dates be placed and is there a particular difficult stretch or 4 home, 5 away or 5 home, 4 away. But besides that, it was the one true championship format where everybody played everyone. Well, now we've got 14 teams playing this upcoming fall. And so everyone has 13 possible opponents, but they only play 9 conference games. So everybody misses 4 possible opponents. Therefore, there could be some discrepancy. There will be discrepancy in regards to difficulty of schedule. And just to see how they chose to integrate Houston, BYU, UCF, and Cincinnati. We'll, of course, look at Oklahoma's schedule here first and foremost. Let me pull it up and you can dissect it from there. I will let everyone know that we did a Big 12 schedule release yesterday afternoon. So if you want to catch the 2 hours that we did with the call-in show, it's posted right here on the Oklahoma channel. But I know that Oklahoma opens against one of the newcomers, Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think Mark Oklahoma actually plays 3 of the 4 new teams in the conference with as you mentioned opening at Cincinnati, and then they host UCF, and then they go to BYU next to the last game of the year, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, regular season wise. So yeah, I think interesting. Obviously, there's going to be some tie-ins with UCF and Oklahoma with Dylan Gabriel and Jeff Levy. Thing I think that's kind of a situation that'll have a little bit of a storyline to it. You know, with what they have together and from a past perspective. And then Oklahoma has played Cincinnati, and then previously they had a home and home situation with them a few years ago. So I think that'll be an interesting game as just to kick off the Big 12 season as well. I think one of the other things is looking at the teams that Oklahoma misses with this. Obviously Houston is one of those, but from the Big 12 perspective, Texas Tech, Baylor, and Kansas State are the 3 that Oklahoma miss, and I think most people aren't going to be too heartbroken that Oklahoma is missing Kansas State just because of the recent struggles that Oklahoma has had with them. But you've got 3 of the potential stronger teams from a Big 12 perspective over the last few years. Texas Tech obviously is made a big jump in the first season under Joey McGuire, and then Baylor and Kansas State kind of obviously they know what they represent. A little bit of a down year for Baylor this year as opposed to where they were the previous year. But Kansas State was one of the better teams in the country, certainly from a Big 12 championship perspective. So yeah, I think the thing that's interesting, I think the most interesting to me, Mark, is the ending to this season for Oklahoma. The tail end is a little bit difficult when you think of going to Stillwater. You host West Virginia, then you go to BYU, and then on Black Friday, TCU comes to Norman, as well as would continue to expect that TCU still will kind of pick up where they left off to a certain degree. Maybe not necessarily quite as successful of a season, but still, I think it's a really it's challenging in certain ways. Going to Stillwater's always a tough a tough situation, and then I think going to BYU is something that a lot of people don't necessarily think about, but I think that was one of the matchups that we had discussed. I think that would be interesting for Oklahoma late in the year. You never know what that weather's going to look like, and in Provo, Utah, if that's a later kick, and some of the elevation situations that you come into with playing out there, that's a little bit different than obviously regionally based. But yeah, no, I think it's certainly a good schedule. Exciting. I think it's exciting to see Oklahoma and all these other teams play some of these teams that they don't normally play. Like I said, Oklahoma, I haven't dissected it in detail to look and see. I see Texas specifically. They only play. It looks like they're playing Houston and BYU. Those are the only two new members that they play. So interesting to see just what the balance looks like across the conference, and I think it's exciting to get it started for a year or however long it ends up being, a couple of years.
Just to delve a little bit more into the trip to BYU, I don't know that we could find a team across the country, a program across the country that would uh, receive more diverse feedback in regards to how good the program is, whether they actually play Power Five football or they're more of a group of five, because their schedules all over the place. I break down these schedules every year across the country, and when I get to BYU's schedule, I always call it the strangest schedule in the country because they load up on a lot of really good opponents the first month of the season when everyone's playing non-conference games. And then you can tell it's difficult for them to find opponents after that when they were an independent.
Hmm.
So they can go from playing uh, some of the best teams in the country to 2 weeks later, they're playing Wagner and they're playing Utah Tech, and they're just trying to fill out a schedule.
Right.
Well, we've arrived at a different place now. They're in the Big 12. But to look at how they've fared against Power Five teams at home might be an interesting exercise at some point. I'm looking at 2022. Actually, I'm looking at one of my favorite sites. It's got historical scores going back to the beginning of time, but they have not filled in 2022. So by memory, they hosted Arkansas this year. It was a good game for about 3 quarters. They got blown out in the fourth quarter. They lost by 17, 20 points, something like that. They beat Baylor at home in overtime this past season. So there's a connection to the Big 12, and they beat a decent team. Baylor, of course, was not as good this past season. The year before, in 2021, they hosted Utah, who eventually won the Pac-12, and they beat them by 9 points at home. They beat an 8-5 Arizona State team by 10 points at home. They went on the road and lost to Baylor by 2 touchdowns. They went to USC and won, but that was a bad USC team. The season before, in 2020, They didn't play any Power Fives because of the messed up schedule. 2019, they hosted Utah. They lost by 18. They went to Tennessee and won against an 8-5 Tennessee team. They beat USC, who finished 8-5. They beat them by a field goal at home. They lost to Washington at home pretty decidedly. So they've not been dominant at home by any stretch against the Power Five, but they've been extremely respectable in taking on good Power Five programs and holding their own at home.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think Oklahoma has a lot of, uh, a little bit of negative history with BYU. You know, Oklahoma. It was a game that actually happened at the Dallas Cowboy Stadium, which I think not only did Oklahoma lose the game in which they were a fairly heavy favorite, but that was the game where Bradford got knocked out of the game as well. So I think there's a little, not that there's bad blood or anything like that, but I think there's some um, obviously that game comes with some negative feelings and some negative thoughts. But no, I mean, I think your point is well taken. BYU is one of those teams that, yeah, I would agree. They kind of they kind of, I think, float in people's mind between what a Power Five team looks like and what a Group of Five team looks like, because as you mentioned, excuse me, they've played and they've beat several of these Power Five opponents and teams. So I think they are set up in such a way that they will be able to be very successful early and often. Now, I mean, the schedule may take a little bit of a toll on them in terms of continuously playing the Power Five opponents, over and over again. I mean, as you mentioned, they have Arkansas again this year, which they travel to Arkansas. But other than that, they go to Kansas, to TCU, to Texas, to West Virginia, and then they host Iowa State and Oklahoma, and then go to Stillwater to end the season. So it'll be very intriguing to see not just BYU, but I think that's the team that probably comes to mind along with Cincinnati. I mean, I'm sorry, yeah, along with Cincinnati as teams that have had a lot of recent success. Not that Houston hasn't, not that UCF hasn't, but I think with Cincinnati making it to the college football playoff last year, and BYU being very successful over the last few years, over and above, what you would expect maybe as a Group of Five team, that they'll have the opportunity to come in and be very successful this first year.
Yeah, it's an interesting four. You've got BYU, who historically helped usher in the passing offense in college football, but of course, that's ancient history. That's 40 years ago. You also have BYU being the one outlier of a national champion in the last 40 years, winning a national championship as an undefeated team in 1984. But since then, they've been a good program. A lot of 8-5s over the past 30 to 40 years for BYU. The other three have all kind of taken their turns as being near the best or the best of the Group of Five. Cincinnati currently, of course, just went to a playoff 2 years ago, have had a tremendous run under Luke Fickell. Well, he's gone. He has to be given a pretty large amount of credit for lifting Cincinnati. He was 4-8 his first season there. They weren't very good, and he lifted them to national status. We'll see what Scott Satterfield can maintain. As things stand right now, I think that's a downgrade in head coaches. We shall see. UCF, of course, was the talk of college football roughly 5 years ago, had back-to-back undefeated regular seasons, won a Peach Bowl, and so they were the top of the line Group of Five about 5 years ago, and they're good right now. They're in a good place. And then Houston had its run at a number of different times, and about close to 10 years ago, they beat Florida State in a New Year's Six game and had a 13-1 season, and a number of seasons close to that. So they've all taken their shot as being the top dog among the Group of Five, and now they all join. And when this was announced that these four schools were joining, I posted a video and I gave reasons why each one could be the best entry but I was not decisive in any way because you can build an argument for any one of the four as being the best entry into the Big 12.
Yeah, you absolutely can, Mark, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's, I when you look at some of these teams, I think Houston was a team this year that was very much built up as a team that could potentially be, to your point, a UCF, could potentially be a Cincinnati that could challenge for an opportunity to get in that top 10, or obviously get in the top four to get into a playoff spot. And it certainly didn't materialize the way that they had envisioned it. The season wasn't quite as successful, but yeah, no, I think, I agree with your sentiment about Cincinnati. I think Oklahoma's catching them, perhaps at a good time, to go play at Cincinnati, especially having that game being earlier in the year. But yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to pinpoint if you were to say, like, which one of these four teams are set up for the most immediate success. I think it's very hard to pinpoint one over the other. I mean, I don't even know which way I probably would lean BYU, I guess, more than the others, just over the consistent success that they've had over the last few years. But I think it's, to your point, you could make a case for each one of these teams in terms of, what that looks like. I mean, and maybe it's something that would be as simple as coming down to schedule, looking at some of those opponents. Houston has to go. Just looking at that, they play at Texas Tech, at Kansas State, at Baylor, and at UCF. And then you've got Cincinnati, who's probably not quite as tough as a road schedule but they do go to BYU, to Oklahoma State, to Houston, and to West Virginia. So I think it's going to be very, very intriguing to see where these four teams kind of land in the pecking order. Not necessarily, I mean, yes, this year and for the next couple of years, but after the Oklahoma and Texas exit to the SEC, what does that consistently look like for those schools?
The other aspect of this Big 12 schedule release that hit me was once I went to rivalry weekend. So the SEC, full bore rivalry weekend. Every school in the conference, whether they're playing another SEC school or an ACC school in 4 cases, they're sold out on rivalry weekend. The Big 10, every game across the board is a rivalry matchup. The Pac-12, pretty much the same across the board. The Big 12 just seemed to have completely discarded rivalry weekend and didn't seem to factor into their thought process at all.
Yeah, I thought that was very bizarre, Mark. That was the one bizarre thing that I saw with the schedule release. That, yeah, there's no rivalries at
No,
all being played on that
they're
week.
just random
Yeah,
games.
yeah, they're all. I mean, the only one Texas Tech and Texas are playing, and that's not. I
Yeah.
mean, it's turned into maybe a little bit of a rivalry with A&M leaving the conference. But no, you're right. Oklahoma and Oklahoma State are playing they're actually playing the weekend of November 4th, so they're a few weeks away from that game. And so, yeah, I think that would be interesting to understand what their thought process was around that. To your point, with an opportunity here to to showcase some of these rivalries that with the new Big 12 that was missed there. It was, yeah, kind of interesting. I didn't really understand that one either.
Yeah, because on rivalry weekend, it appears over the past probably 10 years since Texas A&M and Missouri left that the Big 12 has been all over the place in how they've approached the last weekend of the season. You would remember much better than me, but at one point I just assumed Bedlam was the last weekend of the season because it had been scheduled that way for however many years, and then they started to move it around a little bit. And yeah, they seemed to go back and forth for Texas once Texas A&M left, between TCU, Texas Tech, and then it seemed to be just random. They seemed to pair West Virginia and Iowa State together for a while, probably because they didn't have anywhere else to go, and try to make something out of that. And that's no longer a thing. Now, I totally understand them looking at Oklahoma saying, you're not going to be in the league. We don't need to accommodate your rivalry anymore because it's going to be passe here pretty soon anyway. So I totally get it, but it doesn't seem like they're trying to establish anything else. Like Cincinnati, West Virginia, that that would be a game that I would think that they would want to put together to try to build something there, because there is no natural rivalry for West Virginia, and Cincinnati would be the closest thing geographically.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I mean, and I'm just looking through this trying to I mean, there's not you can kinda try this in some situations, you can kinda stretch and see, yeah, I could see where that could be a rivalry, but no, it's not the case for, really any of these teams. I mean, Oklahoma plays TCU that weekend, like, as we mentioned, Texas Tech and Texas. Baylor and West Virginia, BYU and Oklahoma State, Kansas State and Iowa State, Cincinnati and Kansas, UCF and Houston. Um, yeah, so there's no real tie. I would have liked to see, to your point, I think West Virginia and Cincinnati would have been um, a great game to have on that weekend, and they have it the weekend before. So, yeah, I mean, it's bizarre, I think, in a lot of ways, and and maybe some way they're trying to create, you know, s- manufacture some rivalries that may may come to fruition or something like that. But I would have liked to have seen them, switch some things up. Like it would be interesting to see Houston and Texas play on that weekend. You could have Kansas and Kansas State. We mentioned Cincinnati and West Virginia there, and Oklahoma State, and just some other ones that could possibly have been something that we're not seeing. So it's one of those situations, Mark, where you'd like to kind of tap the ear and just kind of understand, kind of what went into that thought process. But I think we both agree here. I think this is a little bit of an opportunity missed for the Big 12.
I also would like to know if they're going to work by some kind of format, or if they're going to announce going forward that this is our format, like in the ACC. You get three primary opponents you play every year. We split the rest of the league, and so you can kind of follow along as to what the format is. This seems like they just made a schedule and they didn't
Mhm.
announce that we're going to do anything in particular. Now, it makes sense that they might be waiting for Oklahoma and Texas to leave, and then once they do, they'll say, okay, this is going to be our scheduling format going forward. So that I get. I'm just curious as to whether that's going to be a thing in the future.
Yeah, and forgive me, Mark. I may have missed this in some of the announcement and stuff that's going on with the new Big 12, but they've yet to announce the structure of the league in terms of divisions, or if it's just one big league that's divisionless, and the top two teams make the Big 12 championship game. So if it's divisions, I think that would be interesting to see what those divisions look like. I would guess that they'll probably just have one, no, without divisions, just one conference, in the top two teams would make it to the championship game. Otherwise, it might be something that you would have to look at, restructuring after Oklahoma and Texas leave. That would just, I mean, that just seems like logical. That makes the most sense. But I don't think anything's been announced as far as that is concerned, to my knowledge.
Yeah, that seems to be the wave of the future.
Mhm.
The Pac-12 still schedules based on divisions, but they did away with that last year. They just set up 1 versus 2. The ACC is going to start that this year. No divisions, 1 versus 2.
Yeah.
Outgoing Big Ten Commissioner Kevin Warren has stated there will be no divisions. Now, I don't know if he's unilaterally making a decision, then he's leaving for the Chicago Bears. So other people are going to decide whether that's going to be carried through, or they've already decided no divisions in the Big Ten. And for as much as I would like to see divisions work with a championship game between the two champions of the divisions, it does, if you put the entire league together, it does avoid the issue with having a fourth best team in the league possibly winning a conference championship game. And with the new 12-team playoff, leagues want to especially avoid that. All right.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Mark. I mean, we've had so many. Before we move on, I was just going to say we've had so many situations, over the last 10 or 12 years. To your point, where you've got the third or fourth or fifth best team in the league, making that conference championship game. I mean, I point to the Big Ten more so from a recent perspective, right? In terms of we've seen some teams like Michigan the last 2 years. Michigan and Ohio State are clearly the best 2 teams in the Big Ten, and the fact that the winner of that game is making it, and the loser is just kind of out there, knowing that they're still one of the best 2 teams. I think it's the best way to handle it moving forward, and I agree with you. It's kind of it would have been nice to see divisions work, but I think it just makes more sense to have the best 2 teams in the league, not necessarily the best team in your particular division. And that was the case for Oklahoma early on. I mean, when it was separated between the North and the South, there was a few years where Texas was the second best team in the league, and Oklahoma would play. Had a couple years played Colorado. A couple years played Kansas State. One year Kansas State upset them, but a couple years that the team from the North wasn't certainly wasn't the second best team in the league. So I think it makes sense.
Oh, there was a run in the early 2000s that was pretty funny when it came to, I think, Colorado showing up a number of times. One time they lost to Texas like 70-3. Let's see here.
I remember that.
Yeah, there was some matchups where clearly a certain team did not belong. Yeah, they lost to Oklahoma 29-7. They lost to Texas. Yeah, they lost to Oklahoma 42-3. We had 2 consecutive Big 12 championship games where Colorado's unranked and they're facing the number 2 team in the country, Oklahoma. One year, they lose 42-3. The next year, they face Texas, the number 2 team in the country. They lose 70-3.
Yeah.
So not necessarily the best look.
Yeah.
All right. Good stuff. Well, we had discussed the last few weeks about the possibility of Jeff Lebby leaving to go to Alabama. But Jeff Lebby made as you pointed out to me before we started to record, Jeff Lebby made a pretty strong statement in not even taking an interview, but staying put, at least for now.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit for me and maybe some. I think a little bit surprising the fact that he elected not to even take an interview. I think as we talked through this last week, Mark, I think when you have someone of the nature of Nick Saban and the nature of the Alabama program come calling from an offensive coordinator perspective, it's something that you kind of think through. And I know that there was some flattery. There had to have been some flattery there, but at the same time, I think part of that thought process for him had to have been, is this a lateral move for me? The next logical step for me is to be a head coach, preferably I think at the Power 5 level. So, what does that look like for him, really, just in terms of career progression? So I think he and as we talked, we both, and I thought that, I didn't think that he would end up taking the job, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him take the interview for it. But yeah, no, he completely declined the interview. Obviously, staying at Oklahoma, so you have to think, as long as Oklahoma wants him as the offensive coordinator, he's not going to find a better fit as than he would at Alabama in terms of the financial implications of how much Alabama is paying their coordinators, and then just from a program perspective, Alabama has obviously set the bar over the last few years. So the fact that he's continuing to stay at Oklahoma, I think is further proves the fact that he's happy here, he enjoyed it here, it's his alma mater, and then obviously the second part of that, he wants his next job to be a head coaching job wherever that might be. That's his next career progression, and that's his desire. So good news for Oklahoma fans. I think, in talking to people, I think there was some thoughts that he might interview and he might have a little bit of flirtation with the job, and things like that. But the fact that he decided, a lot of people didn't think that he would take the job, thought that it was a slim, but he had enough here at Oklahoma that would continue to keep him here. And so good news from a just kind of, I think it would be really, really tough for Oklahoma to go into, especially right now at this time frame, go into looking for another guy and another offensive installation in as many years for Oklahoma. So I think it's obviously value add for both sides, and the kids and the programs, for Levy to continue to be here at Oklahoma.
Nick Jackson is a second team All ACC performer at Virginia as a linebacker who, I don't know, maybe you can clarify this, Jason. Is he a graduate transfer or did he enter the transfer portal? Do you know?
He entered the transfer portal. I don't know. I don't think he's a graduate transfer.
Okay.
But I don't know that for sure. I know that he was a three-time All ACC selection, as we mentioned. We talked about that a little bit before. I think last year had 117 tackles, and yeah, I'm just kind of looking through here. I don't see anything specific to him being a graduate transfer. So he's a really big impact transfer for Oklahoma, and I think this is between Oklahoma and Iowa. From everything that I've heard, he's taken visits to both, likes both. I think he's in one of those situations where he's really looking for. I don't think NIL is a big impact here, a big part of his decision. I think the biggest part of his decision here is really just trying to put himself in a position to have a little bit more, a little bit more notoriety from a draft perspective. So I think you've got two ways to look at this, right? If you're Oklahoma, and if you're Nick Jackson making this decision, whereas you look at Oklahoma, you look at Brent Venables as one of, if not the best linebacker coaches in the country. Um, does that is that intriguing enough? Is that enticing enough for him to make that decision? Understanding the fact that Oklahoma's defense has not been, extremely solid over the last, 10 to 15 years, or do you go to a place like Iowa that has, maybe you don't have as much of the national media, as much of the national brand and attention as you would at Oklahoma, but still a fairly good brand at Iowa. But certainly Iowa has more of a situation where they've put out great defenses year in and year out over the last few years. So I think it'll be interesting. The one thing that is, I think, intriguing to think through this, and we talked about this last week in terms of Bronco Mendenhall being someone that there's some discussions with. Don't really know how far advanced those discussions are in terms of him possibly coming over to be the defensive coordinator. But I have heard that that Nick Jackson and Mendenhall are very very close. So not necessarily saying that it's a package deal or anything like that, but saying that you know if Oklahoma was able to pull the trigger on both of them, I think it would be obviously mutually beneficial. So I think that's one thing that to look at as as Jackson looks to make that decision between Oklahoma and Iowa.
Jackson's played 40 games in his career, and as Jason has outlined, and we posted the stats, has been extremely productive in his career. Back to back 100 tackle seasons for the Virginia Cavaliers, and as Jason noted, basically has lived on the All ACC first or second team during the last 3 years. So, yeah, I think Jason did a nice job of outlining the pros and cons of Oklahoma versus Iowa. Iowa's posted one of the best defenses in the nation the last several seasons. They do, based on my conversations with our guy Corey Bratta at our Iowa show, they lose a ton of linebacking uh, productivity, including Jack Campbell, who's one of the best in the country. So he's looking at, I don't think he's in a situation where he's concerned about playing time. So he's not looking for an opening that he's going to have to fit into. He's going to be a player and going to be a starter regardless. But just whatever he considers to be a good fit. And I got to think on the surface, either one's a pretty good selection. All right. Yeah, we've got an update on National Signing Day. We only had 4 of the top 100 players not signed coming into this. And our guy Robert is letting us know that Nicholas Harbor, who is an elite athlete, like an Olympic athlete, he has chosen South Carolina. He was looking at Michigan and a number of other schools, Oregon. So he's out of the DMV, and he has chosen South Carolina. Number 1 rated athlete in the country, number 1 player in the DC, top 15 player nationally, goes to South Carolina. I saw where 3 of the top 100 players are set to announce between 1 and 2 p.m. Eastern time today. So we will track those and certainly post videos on those particular team sites. All right. No comments and questions in the chat. Don't know that there's anything else out there in regards to national recruiting. Jaden Rashada, we did discuss him here and pretty much everywhere because he was the talk of college football for about a week, has chosen Arizona State after the whole NIL blow up at the University of Florida. So Jaden Rashada to ASU, Nicholas Harbor to South Carolina. All right.
Yeah, and I don't think. I mean, there's not really a whole lot of impact for Oklahoma, as you'd mentioned. There's not a whole lot of the big guys, so to speak, that are still announcing. I had saw this earlier this morning that Alabama has officially locked up the number 1 spot. But I think again, Oklahoma's still sitting there. I wouldn't really anticipate that changing that much, but Oklahoma's still sitting there at number 4 overall in the 247 rankings. And so I think it's just about as good of a recruiting class as you could have hoped for Oklahoma with everything that happened during the season. They're right there, right behind Texas, and just percentage points ahead of Ohio State. So if Ohio State gets anyone of any magnitude today, Oklahoma could slip down to number 5. But as it shows right now, Oklahoma's at number 4, and there's a little bit of a, not necessarily an impact, but a link from Oklahoma with Shane Beamer there at South Carolina, and man, he's just doing a tremendous job there. I think I don't know if he's going to have enough to get that more of an to get that in more of an even playing field between South Carolina and Clemson as it has. I know South Carolina won the game this year for the first time in however long it's been, a long time. But I think you have to continuously be impressed with the job that he's done in just the 2 short years. Usually that it takes a couple of years to get your guys there, and so what they've done, what they were able to do this year with the you might have the numbers. I think they won, was it 9 games this year?
They lost the bowl game, so they went 8-5.
5, that's right. But you got big time wins over Clemson and Tennessee this year. So I mean, the fact that they continue to climb in the positive direction, I think is impressive. Very impressive.
Yeah, he impressed me right out of the gate when he took 4 quarterbacks. They started 4 quarterbacks the season before due to injury, due to poor play. None of them should have been starting a game in the SEC.
Right.
And he still pieced together a 7-6 record with 4 third string quarterbacks, basically. And then, of course, they get Spencer Rattler, who did not turn in some spectacular season.
Right.
He was okay, and then he turned it on late.
Mm-hmm.
And for them to knock out Tennessee and Clemson in back-to-back weeks and take Notre Dame to the wire in a very entertaining Gator Bowl, and then do what he's doing. Unfortunately, yes, if they were in the ACC, then it would be really interesting, but they have got a mountain to climb. I think their first objective would be separating from, well, probably catching Tennessee to a certain extent, but there's just that layer of teams in the SEC Eastern Division between Kentucky, South Carolina, Missouri, Tennessee before this year, where they're all pretty much playing on the same plane, and to break free and start to win all the games against those other teams in the SEC East before you can take a shot at the monster in the division in college football. So,
yep, no, I completely agree. It's a difficult challenge for them. I mean, and you've got some of those teams where it's going to be hard for them almost impossible year in and year out to compete in the SEC. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. The first goal is to kind of separate themselves from that and get up into that, upper echelon of the SEC.
you can make an argument that South Carolina is the most underachieving program in the history of college football. They really have won nothing. They've really done nothing the entire history of the program. Steve Spurrier had 3 really nice seasons near the end of his tenure. He went 11-2 3 consecutive years, but they didn't win anything, and they've really won nothing the entire. You could liken Kansas or Oregon State and other histories, and I know that it may sound ridiculous to a lot of people because South Carolina has been more successful than those programs recently, but if you look over the entirety of history, and South Carolina is playing in the South, they're obviously in the state of South Carolina. They have football talent all around them. They have a rabid fan base. They pack their stadium like with I don't know that there's another school like them that has that kind of support, has that kind of recruiting footprint, and has never really achieved anything. So Shane Beamer might be the guy to get it done.
That's right. Yep.
All right, everyone. We appreciate you being here at Oklahoma Sooners Live. We come your way each and every Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. Central. We would ask that you would go out there and grab a few friends and bring them in as well. We also want to let you know that at times we have to change the schedule due to our personal schedules. So please subscribe and turn on that notifications bell to know when we drop new videos and also when we go live so you can be here. Jason, we appreciate you making this happen now for folks. This was our 100th show, as you see on the banner there. So, Jason, appreciate that for 2 years of Oklahoma Live.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
All right, everyone. We'll catch you next week here on our Sooners channel. Check out the content, and we will see you soon.